full Independence Day Day. We have a number of proponents on this bill. But first up, bill introductions. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of Governor Kelly, I have 21 RS 1381, which is an act concerning medicinal marijuana funded by, which would fund Medicaid expansion.
Thank you. Matt, do you have that RS number?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other bill introductions by committee? Seeing none, bill introductions from the audience. Speaker O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike O'Neill on behalf of Walmart. We're asking for introduction of RS 1348, commonly known as the Inform Act. It would require marketplace retail marketplace internet suppliers to vet third-party retailers a little bit better because we have a lot of online third-party vendor fraud going on. So this would just be a additional vetting process.
Thank you. Do you have that, Matt?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Then without objection, it's submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have other bill introductions from the audience? No further bill introductions from the audience. No bill introductions from committee, other than what we've accepted. Bill introductions is closed. I will open it up at the end of the meeting today. Committee, we're going to take up House Bill 2184, creating the Kansas Medical Marijuana Regulation Act. Matt, I'm sure this will take a little time, but could you give us the overview?
Absolutely, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully the committee got my bill brief that I sent out this morning. It's, as the chairman referenced, not short. I'm going to try to, but I think of my bill brief as kind of the cliff notes for the bill, and then I'm going to try to run through the highlights of that in describing the bill, and then, you know, obviously any questions that come up, hopefully address those. So House Bill 2184 would enact the Kansas Medical Marijuana Regulation Act. The bill would allow registered patients and caregivers to obtain a physician's recommendation to possess and administer medical marijuana for the medical treatment of a qualifying medical condition under the Act. So under the bill, the Secretary for KDHE would provide for the registration of patients and caregivers, and with the issuance of identification cards, and provide for the licensure of cultivators and laboratories that test medical marijuana. The forms in which medical marijuana could be dispensed under the Act would include oils, tinctures, plant material, edibles, patches, or any form approved by the Secretary of Revenue. The Board of Healing Arts would regulate the issuance of certifications to physicians allowing for the recommendation of medical marijuana for treatment. The Secretary of Ag would provide for the licensure and regulation of the cultivation, possession, testing, and sale of medical marijuana by cultivators and laboratories. And the Director of Alcoholic Beverage Control would administer the program and provide for the licensure of processors, distributors, and retail dispensaries. The Director would also establish and maintain an electronic database to monitor medical marijuana from its seed source through its cultivation, testing, processing, distribution, and dispensing. So that's kind of a broad summary of the bill, and then I was going to kind of run through some of the specific highlights throughout particularly in the new sections of the bill. So section 2 is just the definition section. Definitely look to there for some of the things like a qualifying medical condition in terms of what would be covered under the Act. Section 3 of the bill prohibits anyone from growing, processing, selling, transporting, furnishing, or possessing any form of marijuana unless it was pursuant to the Act or the Commercial Industrial Hemp Act. Section 5 would create the Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee in the Department of Health and Environment. It would consist of 15 members, and that committee would develop and submit to the Secretary of KDHE, the Secretary of Ag, and the Director of ABC any recommendations related to the program and the implementation and enforcement of the Act. Section 8 would allow a patient seeking medical marijuana or a caregiver seeking to assist a patient in the use of medical marijuana to apply to the Secretary of KDHE for registration under the Act, and for the physician treating the patient would submit an application on behalf of the patient. That application for registration would include a statement from the physician certifying certain conditions, the name of any caregiver who would help administer medical marijuana, the names of all patients who the caregiver was seeking to assist with administering medical marijuana, and in the case of a patient being a minor, the name of the patient's parent or legal guardian who had consented to treatment with medical marijuana. The secretary would be required to register a patient or caregiver and issue an ID card if the application was complete and met the requirements of the Act. Registered caregivers would be required to be 21 years of age, and the fees for a patient or caregiver would be set by rules and regs, but would be statutorily capped at no more than $50 for a patient registration, $25 for an indigent patient or a veteran, and $25 for a caregiver. Sections 10 and 11 of the bill would allow a registered patient or caregiver who obtained medical marijuana from a licensed retail dispensary to use or assist a patient in using medical marijuana. And then registered patients and caregivers could not possess more than a 90-day supply of medical marijuana. Sections 14 and 15 would require the Secretary of KDHE to adopt rules and regs for the Act prior to July 1 of 2022. Section 16 would require the Secretary of KDHE to negotiate in good faith to enter into a reciprocity agreement with any other state under which a medical marijuana registry ID card was issued and then recognized in Kansas. Section 17 would require a physician seeking to recommend treatment with medical marijuana to apply to the Board of Healing Arts for a certificate authorizing them to recommend such treatment. Section 18 would require the Board of Healing Arts to adopt rules and regs for the Act prior to July 1 of 2022. Section 19 would allow a person to submit a petition to the Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee requesting that a disease or condition be added as a qualifying medical condition. Section 20 would provide an application process for an entity that sought to cultivate medical marijuana or to conduct laboratory testing of medical marijuana to receive an annual license from the Secretary of Agriculture. Section 21 would provide that cultivators would be either level 1 or level 2 licensees, and that distinction would impact the amount of square footage they'd be allowed to have for cultivation purposes. Section 22 would allow a laboratory licensee to obtain medical marijuana from licensed cultivators, processors, or retail dispensaries and to conduct medical marijuana testing consistent with the rules and regs adopted by the Secretary of Agriculture. Section 23 would allow the Secretary of Ag to set those fees for a cultivator license and laboratory license through rules and regs, but again, put statutory caps on those fees. Sections 24 and 25 would allow the Secretary to refuse to issue or renew a license or to revoke or suspend a license and impose civil penalties under certain conditions. Section 27 would require the Secretary of Agriculture to adopt rules and regulations to implement the Act by July 1 of 2022. Sections 28 through 32 would allow entities seeking to distribute, process, or sell at retail medical marijuana to apply to the Director of ABC for an annual license. Processor licenses would be allowed to obtain medical marijuana from one or more licensed cultivators or processors, process medical marijuana into a form for laboratory testing, and then deliver or sell that processed medical marijuana. Distributor licenses would be allowed to purchase wholesale medical marijuana from licensed processors, store that medical marijuana in a form that was approved for distribution under the Act, and then deliver or sell processed medical marijuana to licensed retail dispensaries. And then retail dispensary licensees would be allowed to obtain medical marijuana from licensed processors and dispense or sell medical marijuana to registered patients. Section 33 prescribes the forms in which medical marijuana could be dispensed under the Act. It would include oils, tinctures, plant material, edibles, patches, or any form approved by the Secretary of Revenue. The Act would prohibit the smoking, combustion, or vaporization or any method that was considered to be attractive to children. Section 34 would allow a person to submit a petition to the Director of ABC requesting that a particular form or method of using medical marijuana be approved. Section 35 would allow the Secretary of Revenue to set fees for those licensees through rules and regs, and again, would put statutory caps on those fees. Section 36 and 37 would allow the Director of ABC to refuse to issue, renew, or revoke or suspend a license, or to impose a civil penalty under certain circumstances. Section 39 would it require the Secretary of Revenue to adopt rules and regs by July 1 of 2022. Section 40 would require the Director of ABC to establish and maintain an electronic database to monitor medical marijuana. The database would allow for information to be updated instantaneously, and all licensed cultivators, laboratories, processors, distributors, and retail dispensaries will be required to submit information to the database, any information that the director determined was necessary. Section 41 would authorize the director to establish a payment processing system with the treasurer, in which the accounts were created to be used only by registered patients and caregivers at licensed retail dispensaries and all licensed cultivators, laboratories, processors, and distributors. Section 42 would prohibit a licensed cultivator, laboratory, processor, distributor, and retail dispensary from being located within 1,000 feet of a school, religious organization, public library, or public park. Section 43 would require each applicant for a cultivator, laboratory, distributor, or retail dispensary license to require any owner, director, officer, or an employee of that applicant to be fingerprinted and to submit to a state and national criminal history record check. Section 44 would provide certain exemptions from criminal law for a financial institution that provided financial services to a licensed cultivator, laboratory, processor, distributor, or retail dispensary if those licensees were in compliance with the Act and all applicable tax requirements. Section 47 would make it a Class A misdemeanor to store medical marijuana where it was readily available to a child. Section 48 would make it unlawful to refuse to rent or sell real property or to discriminate in the terms or conditions of the sale of real property on the basis of a person's use of medical marijuana in accordance with the Act. Section 49 would prohibit healthcare facilities from denying medical or other services related to organ transplantation on the basis that that individual consumed medical marijuana. Section 50 would prohibit an order for protective custody, temporary custody, removal of the child from parental custody, or informal supervision if the sole basis for the threat to the child's safety or welfare was that the child resided with an individual who consumed medical marijuana in accordance with the Act. Sections 51 and 52 would prohibit the revocation, suspension, or limitation of a physician's license or the public censure or placement of probationary conditions on that physician due to the physician advising patients or being a registered patient themselves under the Act. Section 53 would prohibit any body or commission that determines qualification of individuals for licensure from disqualifying any individual from licensure solely because that individual consumed medical marijuana. Sections 54 and 55, now we're going to get into the amendatory sections, would concerning the unlawful manufacture of a controlled substance and the unlawful distribution and possession of a controlled substance, they would exempt licensed cultivators, processors, distributors, or retail dispensaries under the Act. Section 56 would amend concerning the unlawful possession of a controlled substance and would exempt a person registered or licensed under the Act whose possession was authorized under the Act. Section 57 would amend KSA 215707 concerning the unlawful use of a communication facility and the commission of a felony to exempt a person using those communication facilities for activities authorized by the Act. Section 58 concerning the unlawful possession of drug paraphernalia would exempt any registered person or license pursuant to the Act whose possession was used pursuant to the Act in a manner authorized by the Act. Section 59 concerning the unlawful distribution or manufacture of drug paraphernalia would exempt any person licensed pursuant to the Act whose distribution was used for medical marijuana in a manner authorized by the Act. Section 60 concerning a court's determination of legal custody, residency, and parenting time of a child would exclude a parent or child's use of medical marijuana in accordance with the Act as a factor in determining custody, residency, or parenting time. Section 61 concerning a child in need of care it would prohibit the court from considering the use of medical marijuana by a parent in accordance with the act in making any determination. Section 62, concerning workers' compensation and the disallowance of recovery for an injury. It would prohibit denial of compensation to an employee if the employee was registered as a patient pursuant to the act, their use of medical marijuana was in accordance with the act, and there had not been a prior incidence of the employee's impairment on the job as a result of that use. Section 63, concerning the qualification for unemployment benefits. If an employee was dismissed for misconduct or gross misconduct, and the amendment would remove or exempt from those definitions of misconduct and gross misconduct the possession of an ID card or the possession or use of medical marijuana consistent with the act. Section 64, concerning unlawful employment practices, to make it unlawful to refuse to hire or fire a person because they were a registered patient or caregiver under the act. Section 66, concerning the regulation of nursing, would prohibit the Board of Nursing from revoking or suspending a registered nurse's license for advising patients or being a registered patient under the act. Section 67 would make the same limitations on the Board of Healing Arts concerning the regulation of midwifery. Section 68, concerning the taxation of marijuana and controlled substances, would add a definition for medical marijuana into the act. And then Section 69 would exempt the lawful possession of medical marijuana to pay the tax required under that act. And I realize that was a very quick run through of a very large bill. I'd be happy to try to answer questions the committee has.
Matt, at some point in time prior to, I doubt it'll probably be after turnaround, I'm going to have you back in for more of a question and answer period for the committee. We are short on time today, but it may take a whole hour and a half one day. We'll just go through each section and have the committee ask questions at that time.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And as I indicated, there is more detail in my written memo. I did not want to read that to the committee, so I would start with that because I did try to make just basically a Cliff Notes version of the whole bill. But I would also encourage any members, if they have questions in the interim, to just reach out to me by email, and I'd be happy to try to answer those as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Committee, without objection, I'm going to move right to the conferees. I will have Matt back after turnaround, and we'll just have a question and answer. You just got the document. It'll give you time to study it, come up with any questions. You know, this bill is quite involved. You've got over, I think, 69 different sections to it. So with that, I'm going to go to the conferees. Conferees, I've been looking at the time, and of course, our committee meetings are only an hour and a half. I need to get out of here at 10:25. Senate Judiciary comes in right after us. So on the conferees, I'm going to have to limit everyone to 3 minutes, and hopefully I'll be able to get through everyone. If I do not, I would, if you want, you will be able to come back tomorrow. We have the opponents tomorrow and the neutrals. There's not as many of them as they are proponents, so I may be able to give you some time tomorrow. We, of course, never limit your written testimony, and you can go online, find members of the committee, send them emails. Their email addresses and is on that. If you have any further testimony you would like for an individual member or the entire committee to look at. With that, our proponents are, first up, former Representative Willie Dove. And as you probably remember, you'll watch the sign for my vice chair. She'll give you the 30-second warning. Thank you and welcome to Federal and State Affairs.
Is it on now? Sounds like it's on now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. It's been a long-awaited time that we've come to this point of making sure that we get the opportunity to help those individuals in Kansas with medical marijuana. Before I was notified that we only had a certain amount of time, I had a few accolades I could display on some of my colleagues here. However, I will dispense with that. When we started this journey six years ago, almost 6 years ago, Judge Barker and I were sitting outside the Capitol, and we were asking, how can we help more Kansans with the medical marijuana? Well, this is why we're here today. First, I'll tell you a story just to make it quick. I had people to come to my office, and they have problems that only medical marijuana were able to help address. And one of the things that really impressed me was that they were not interested in getting high. They wanted the opportunity to have something that they could have in their own possession that would allow them to, one, get rid of seizures and pain. 37-year-old mother in our neighborhood with children, they had to leave the state of Kansas just because they needed medication for their child. I knew these individuals personally. From my understanding, that's happened to several individuals. Individuals in this exact room have family members that those same things are happening to, but yet they're prevented from getting it because it is against the law here in Kansas. One of the things that's happening now is that you're surrounded by other states that do permit medical marijuana. So what do we do when those individuals go across state lines in order to get care? I met with parents, brothers, and sisters, and some of these people you actually know. I was surprised that individuals that I have served with in other areas had family members that had to use medical marijuana. And it wasn't because they wanted it, it wanted it because that was the only thing that would help them. And that was, I can't say shocked, but it did happen. Please don't take this for granted. We're not talking about hippies or from the 60s. We're talking about individuals, law-abiding citizens that really want to make something happen for their families. And I would like to say that the revenue generated from this will be greatly appreciated in Kansas because it does help our bottom line. Thank you for your attention, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and we'll take questions at the end if that's agreeable to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. George Mahaffey, Jr. with Green Healthcare Solutions, Kansas. I believe, George, are you on Webex?
I am, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go forward.
Excellent.
We will notify you when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman and members, real pleasure being here today. Very excited to be here. I'm a lawyer. I am general counsel for Green Healthcare Solutions, Kansas. We are a medical marijuana company. I have been a lawyer, a trial lawyer, and a litigator for more than 20 years. I've handled a wide variety of cases, including investigations with the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, and various state cannabis commissions. I'm excited to be here today because I have been involved in the great state of Kansas over the last 12 to 14 months assisting with the Act or with the medical cannabis bill. And I'm really excited about it because in my prior work experience and working with other states and working with companies that have business in other states like Massachusetts and Maryland and even Canada, I've seen what works and I've seen what hasn't worked. And why I'm excited about what Kansas is doing is because I think Kansas has been able to learn from the other states as to what works and what doesn't. And they've put together a framework that is going to be probably one of the premier, if not the premier, medical cannabis programs in the country. And just in terms of real quick, I wanted to talk about 2 points. I wanted to talk about taxation, and I wanted to talk about, as a lawyer, the legality of the framework or the program or the act itself. In terms of taxation, from what I can see, Kansas is going about it the right way by imposing an excise tax. And I think it's going to be similar to how things have played out in Oklahoma. And I think Oklahoma is a good comparison. Oklahoma does not have what we would call adult recreation. It just has medical cannabis. And so what Oklahoma has done is imposed a 7% excise tax, which has resulted in significant tax revenue for the state. And in terms of the revenue, $80 million in tax revenue in 2020. And that's on $831 million in medical marijuana sales in 2020, which is double what happened in 2019. So it's a significant amount of tax revenue that is coming to the states. I think exactly the same thing is going to happen in Kansas. You have to remember that in 2019 alone, 33,000 medical cannabis new jobs were created in the United States. And the industry itself supports 243,000 full-time jobs. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, these are good jobs. A lot of them are six-figure paying jobs. And the same thing is going to happen in Kansas, where it is very conceivable that once the act passes within the first 2 to 3 years, there will be 3,000 to 5,000 new jobs created in Kansas, which would be significant because these are very good paying jobs. So that's
30
in terms
seconds.
of, yeah. Okay, gotcha. In terms of legality, I took a look at Department of Justice press releases from 2018 to 2020, and just to assuage any concerns folks might have about the legality of it, there were no prosecutions for state compliant medical marijuana activity from 2018 to 2020 by the Department of Justice. What this means is that the feds are not touching a highly regulated states like Kansas is going to be. There should not be any concerns about the legality of the act, of the bill, because Kansas is going to create a highly regulated framework where the feds will have a hands-off approach just as they've done. So there shouldn't be any concerns at all about that. So the bottom line is I am a proponent of the act of Bill 2184. I think it's going to be a great thing for the state of Kansas, for Kansas universities, which will get to share in the tax revenue, for the local business community, and also for the patients, because we remember we're talking about creating medicine and getting medicine to patients. And so Kansas is soon going to be one of the 36 states that recognizes medical cannabis, and it's going to be a windfall for the state and for the population and for the patients. Thank you very much, everybody. Real pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Stefan Krishak, COO, Green Healthcare Solutions, Kansas, on Webex. Are you there, sir? Does not show that he is on Webex, so then we will go to the next. Dr. Jack Consalvo, Medical Director, Green Healthcare Solutions, Kansas, on Webex.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, please, we
Yes,
do.
I'm on Webex.
Thank you, sir. Go forward.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the Honorable Chairman and members of the House Federal and State Affairs Committee for hearing my testimony today. My name is John Salvo. I am a physician. I am the Medical Director for Green Healthcare Solutions, Kansas. My background is in emergency medicine, trauma surgery, toxicology, and forensic medicine. I have 37 years of clinical practice in emergency medicine, both in supervisory and clinical roles. In my experience in the emergency department, as you've already heard testimony, the emergency department, I see a wide breadth of medical disorders. Much of which we see in the emergency department is non-urgent chronic conditions that include PTSD, which affects the bravest of our society, veterans and first responders, but also a myriad of neurological issues like multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, glaucoma, debilitating anxiety disorders, neuropathic pain syndromes, chronic pain syndromes, terminal disease issues related to cancer and chemotherapy. It's the gamut. And issues that we don't have good alternatives for treatment, and has led to a lot of the treatments being opioid-based, which, as you all know, has led to a pandemic of opioid misuse disorder in our country. However, we now have an option for treating many of these medical conditions in medical marijuana. Through my experience, I am a huge proponent of the benefits of medical cannabis in all its administration forms, including edibles, which are the most common and convenient way to administer it, but also, as mentioned, oils, tinctures, and patches. The main reasons for my strong support of medical cannabis and marijuana is twofold. First of all, related to my medical experience, I personally witnessed the benefits of medical cannabis, which in my state is legal, for a number of patient groups, as I mentioned before, which includes those very difficult to treat disorders, neurological disorders, and especially chronic pain issues, again, which have been mainly treated with opioids, and we know what the result of that has been. In fact, the opioid crisis in this country was not created by the illegal import of heroin or opioids, but by doctors, prescribing opioids for chronic pain issues, as mandated by the federal government in the late 1990s. Secondly, the legalization of medical marijuana in Kansas will allow the medication to be widely studied by the public universities. And this is a study that has been lacking due to legal constraints. With legalization, the state and universities will be able to study the compounds of medical marijuana and provide further research, guidance, and insight into additional uses, and help to create new products that will not only benefit patients, but also the local business community.
You'll have to wrap it up.
As a longtime physician, I have not seen another medication that has such a wide range of applications and usages, which in my opinion virtually borders on the definition of a miracle drug. And quite frankly, we have only scratched the surface and seen the tip of the iceberg on what is possible with medical marijuana.
Thank you, Doctor. Your time is up. We have to move right along. Next up is Juanita Ramos, Center for Green Health Solutions, also on Webex. Juanita Ramos.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Good morning. And again, it's 3 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Greetings from Austin, Texas, where we have just gone through a pretty interesting journey, so I'm grateful to be here. I am a proponent and definitely supporter of House Bill 2184, and I'm so grateful that this is finally coming to the people of Kansas. I have extensive experience with several other states advocating for the use of medical cannabis for the patients. I've seen patients that are extremely ill and that have had the opportunity to use medical cannabis and to receive some help from it. Right now, the focus that I have had is to work with Representative Willie Dove in your state and several other lawmakers to bring the best of medical cannabis and the resources to your state to create a program that will ensure a model for the rest of the U.S. Kansas really has an opportunity to take advantage of some of these resources right now. And as we know, the government, the investment necessary in your 2022 budget to maintain your current funding is pretty challenged. And we believe that this is a way to assist to fund all of the budget deficits and fund, along with the Medicare expansion, other programs. One of the things that we have focused on is really creating a unique pilot program that can really study and benefit the bottom line for the schools, for colleges and universities, and also to bring cutting edge technology that has not been used in the United States in the form of a DNA fingerprint technology that begins at the genetic level. And that will follow the plant throughout the entire chain to eradicate counterfeiting, and it will protect the intellectual property of a Kansas-centric strain of medical cannabis. So this will ensure that the safety be in place, that you be able to collect taxes, protect the consumer, and most of all, look at the profitable crop in agribusiness that is profitable all around the world, not just in the United States. We also have a genetic global bank that has made themselves accessible to the state of Kansas, and a biomimicry,
30 seconds left.
A biomimicry technology that will ensure the quality. I want to thank each of you for this time. Marijuana is being sold right now on your streets. No one's saying who can sell it, where it can be sold. No one is collecting taxes on the transaction. And really no one is checking the quality in it and the efficacy for the patients. And I'm really grateful for this time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up is Byron Atoff, MD, Doctor of Cannabis Regulation, Webex. Doctor, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. We hear you perfect. Go forward.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Brian Adkins, and Chairman Barker and the committee, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to offer support for the bill. Until I left full-time academia a couple years ago and moved, I was in Dallas at the University of Texas Southwestern, where I was a distinguished professor of alcohol abuse and alcoholism. I've been an addiction psychiatrist for 35 plus years and have headed up a couple programs, substance abuse programs, and VAs in Charleston and in Dallas. I'm editor of the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse and have published a couple hundred articles on the biology and treatment of addiction. And I'm thrilled that Kansas is considering a medical cannabis bill. You've got 3/4 of the states now that now have medical cannabis, and it's been around since first passed in 1996 in California. And as mentioned, you've been able to benefit from all of the accumulated wisdom. Our country can't agree on much, as we've seen in the last election, except that legalizing cannabis, particularly for medical reasons, is agreed on by all, including Mississippi and South Dakota a few months ago. I wanted to address the medical aspects. A lot of the concern is that there's not enough research. This was a concern expressed in 1996 when it was first passed, and it's continued. There is an enormous amount of research. It is never going to satisfy the opponents. The fact is, cannabis has effects throughout the body. The endocannabinoid system is widespread. It's the most prevalent system in the body, and cannabis does in fact have effects on multiple systems. We don't have the research needed because it's extremely difficult to do. It's even more difficult to do now than it was 25 years ago because of federal restraints. But it is known to be effective. We do have some FDA approved cannabinoids, specific cannabinoids, but certainly the flower has not been approved and probably won't ever be. It's, you know, I
30 seconds left.
I was not a firm proponent of this until I talked to dozens, hundreds of people who have benefited by it. It's safe enough to use given the benefits that we know have accrued. There's been 350 deaths from opioid-related opioids in 2019 in Kansas, none from cannabis. So I'll end with that. And again, thank you for considering this important bill.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Next up is Spencer Duncan with Kansas Cannabis Industry Association. Good morning, Spencer.
There we go. Got to hit the button right. I had fatter fingers than that. Thank you for today's opportunity to speak on this issue. I am Spencer Duncan, the State Director for the Kansas Cannabis Industry Association. I appreciate you having an earnest conversation today in a bill that's had a lot of work put into it by folks from both sides of the aisle, industry, people, citizens, and so thank you for this hearing. As you are aware, we are falling behind. 36 other states today already have adopted full-fledged medical cannabis systems. This includes growing, distributing, and selling of the product, dispensing of the product. There are many here today who have and will continue to touch on the medical benefits of this, and that should always be in the forefront of this discussion. However, I want to touch on a few brief points that should also not be overlooked. The first is there are changes afoot at the federal level. There will be bipartisan legislation during the next few years that will very likely ease federal regulations, and it will not be long before the process begins to create a federal framework for medical cannabis. At the same time, you are seeing and will continue to see relaxation of federal enforcement in areas such as prosecutions, banking, and financial regulations. This is not a matter of if, but it is a matter of when. To that end, we do not want to be saddled with a system forced upon us by the federal government simply because we failed to take action when we had an opportunity to do so. That is where we will find ourselves in Kansas if we continue to kick this issue down the road. Second, we are woefully falling behind in developing our own marketplace. 36 other states, again, have the jump on us. They are developing packaging, software, they're driving research and development, exploring investment opportunities, building marketing networks, and so much more. We want to make sure that as medical cannabis opens into a national marketplace, Kansas is able to join it seamlessly and be an active participant. We can only do that if we put a system in today. Otherwise, we will be shut out of that system and left to watch as others come into Kansas and take our money and our investments out of our state. We must make sure that as we look at what program we implement, it not only serves our immediate needs, but that we are also looking at the larger picture of how our system fits into a national and global marketplace. The framework and regulatory process outlined in 2184 are ideally suited to provide Kansas with an orderly marketplace that protects the health and safety of Kansans. This framework also positions us to not only handle medical cannabis in its early stages, but puts us in a position to readily join the larger system that already exists and those that are being created. We encourage you to support 2184, and I'm always available for further conversation and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Bob Corkland, Frontier Peace Advisors. Bob, good morning and welcome to Fed and State Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the members of the committee for your attention to this issue. You might not guess that it could be difficult for us as a libertarian organization to support a medical marijuana bill, but the fact is the simplest and purest bill, one that we could very enthusiastically support, would be the one that simply decriminalizes, period. Yet despite all the new taxes, fees, regulations, licenses, and all the bureaucracy of this bill, it's still supported by the Libertarian Lobbying Association in Kansas, Frontier Peace. Naturally, we encourage you to remove as much of that regulatory burden as you can for passage. Would anybody around this committee that considers himself a supporter of free market policies and limited government consider this bill that? I think not. We have worked very cooperatively with the Kansas Cannabis Coalition. And months ago, as we talked about our approach to this session, I encouraged them at that point, don't issue any ultimatums, fight to keep any earmarking of revenues out of the bill, and I would certainly encourage that of you today for this bill. And also, with regard to downsides that opponents might bring up, I'd encourage you to keep in mind the strong, powerful, and enormous downside of cannabis prohibition. Weigh that against any disadvantages that the opponents may bring against you. Regulation's the key here, and I want to spend some time talking about revenue potential for Kansas. Your decision about how tightly this market is going to be constrained will be the key to how much job creation, tax revenue, and patient relief that we're going to see. On my attachment A, I've given you a comparison of a couple of different states, Oklahoma and Ohio. 2184 is modeled largely after Ohio, which you would put on the quite restrictive side of state approaches. Oklahoma is more on the free market-oriented side of state approaches. And it's interesting to see that while one is very restrictive, one's more free market, the revenue between the two is pretty close, even though Ohio has 3 times the population of Oklahoma. So it's a really wonderful supply-side evidence here of how if you keep government to a minimum, you can maximize the revenue, you can maximize the exposure, and you can create jobs. Look at that, 9,400 direct cannabis jobs in Oklahoma, 1,700 in the whole state of Ohio. I'd really encourage you to go through our attachments here as well. We try to attack some of the social cost, criminal arguments that have been presented to this issue in the past. I've found some of the best studies that I think you're going to find. In particular, what I want to highlight is from the National Transportation Highway Safety Act that you cannot determine impairment from the level of THC in anybody's bloodstream.
Thank you, sir.
Please keep that in mind as you go forward. Level of THC, whether it's low or high, makes no difference. When somebody says somebody
Thank you,
tested
sir.
positive.
You're taking other people's time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Kendrick Hausler, no organization. but we all look up to you, sir.
Good morning. My name is Kenrick Hausler. I'm a disabled veteran. I retired from the Army in 2018. I also own the CBD Nation and the Nation Labs. We are probably one of the largest producers of CBD products in Kansas. We make currently 17 other labels, and we ship them all around the country. We produce around 100,000 units. This bill is really interesting. We read it a few different times, me, the people who work for me, various others. And there are a couple of things that really stuck out to us. It's great. It can help with depression, PTSD, all kinds of things that everybody's already talked about. A couple of the bigger hang-ups that people have been bringing to us and that we've noticed has been the fees. What are we going to get for the money you're asking? I could write you a check today, but I'm not going to for $100 grand. What stops me from going to Oklahoma and doing it? It's not worth it. You're going to flood the market. You're going to increase the black market. People are going to come through and they're going to try to make that money up in sales. It doesn't work like that. I've been doing this for years. The prices are just way too high. I can go to Oklahoma and do it, make more money, and not have to gouge the customers. From a business perspective, it doesn't make sense. From an individual use perspective, sure, I mean, people are going to benefit from it. They're going to get their edibles and tinctures. But like it was said earlier, we're surrounded by legal states, with much cheaper rates. You're going to make that money up in taxes, like we've already talked about today. You don't have to do it up front. The benefits for PTSD and depression have been spoken about numerous times today. Veteran suicides, this can help tremendously with that. You're talking about, I don't know if you're aware of this, but veterans are committing suicide at a rate of 22 people a day on average. That's a lot. That's the highest rate of suicide in the nation. We can bring that down even a little bit in our state, why wouldn't we? It's nothing but beneficial at that point. Your bill, other than those couple little nuances, looks really good. I agree with a lot of that. But in order to keep the money in Kansas, to trim down the black market, we all know what's being sold here. It's just something that, we could really, really curb and help a lot and still help a lot of people. The smokable is a huge part of it. People want that. We have customers in Colorado, Oklahoma, all over the country who come to us and talk to us about this. And of course, we're like, no, we're not going to do that. It's illegal here. But there's no reason to exempt that. And I will not take any more time. I know some people ran over, so I'll try to make up for it. I do appreciate your time today. I do appreciate you guys talking about this. I am in Topeka. If I can help with anything, please give me a holler. I can take you down to my lab. I can show you guys around. Whatever we need to do to help. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and I just remind you that all of our emails are online, committee members, and please email us with suggestions.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. April Hatch, MSRN, RN, Bleeding, Kansas. Good morning.
Good morning. So good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is April Hatch, and I've been a registered nurse for the last 16 years. In those 16 years, I practiced in the emergency room, helped deliver babies at Overland Park Regional, and received my master's of public health nursing from KU. 3 years ago, I sat at my grandmother's bedside and listened to her tell me she thought she was dying. As a nurse, however, I knew this would not be the day she would die. The agonizing mental and physical pain she was suffering was unfortunately due to withdrawing from the prescription pain medications she had been prescribed until a prescription drug monitoring program was passed. A 90-year-old woman was forced into withdrawal that resulted in the worst days of her life. We know from research that I've included in my written testimony, the opiates are not designed to treat chronic pain, and cannabis does have the potential to prevent patients from suffering like she did. As you are aware, your duty is to protect the citizens of Kansas, and my duty as a nurse is to protect my patients. I would like for you to allow all Kansans to make their own informed healthcare decisions. My grandmother is likely to be the only patient story that brings a tear to my eye, but there are many other stories I can share from working with hundreds of patients all over the country. A mother with a child diagnosed with autism from Kansas, now living in Oklahoma, recently shared with me that her son, who is 10, is no longer wearing diapers because of a high CBD, low THC oil she administers a few times throughout the day. Cannabis is being utilized for conditions affecting both young and old. Tomorrow you will hear that cannabis is addictive and dangerous, and as a registered nurse, I would be happy to share with you the hundreds of studies to show that is not true and that is much less addictive and dangerous than many prescriptions that you can get from the pharmacy. My suggested amendments or things that I would wish for you to consider when working with this bill is patients do need access to the dried cannabis flower for the non-intoxicating and potential anti-inflammatory benefits. Vaporization of dried flower has been a method used for decades in doctors' offices. Patients should be allowed to cultivate their own cannabis. Autism should be added as a qualifying condition, and patients should be offered protections. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Up next, we have Kylie Klug and Owen. Welcome to committee.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kylie Klug, and I humbly ask for your support on HB 2184. On behalf of my 13-year-old son, Owen, my husband, Gavin, and I live in central Kansas with Owen and his two younger brothers. I am a junior high English teacher, and, sorry, I'm gonna take this off. And my husband is a hardworking brick and stone mason. We are proud and practicing Catholics and have been married for 15 years. My sweet, laid-back Owen, unfortunately, suffers from a rare, relentless seizure monster. Oh, hang on a minute. My apologies. So he, as you can see, suffers from a rare, relentless seizure monster called Dravet syndrome. He, in the past, at his worst, has struggled through up to 200 to 300 seizures per day. In his 13 years of life, he has endured 8 different surgeries, 9 failed pharmaceutical trials, and countless procedures, hospitalizations, and treatments. Other than a vagal nerve stimulator implant and a keto diet, no other conventional medical treatments have even come close to providing Owen any relief. In fact, many of these pharmaceutical treatments made his seizures worse, while exacerbating his condition with various side effects, anywhere from kidney, bone, and joint degeneration. So thanks to Claire and Lola's law, Gavin and I have found a combination of treatments that have greatly improved Owen's quality of life by leaps and bounds. In combination with the VNS, keto, and regular chiropractic care, Haley's Hope Hemp Oil has given Owen his life back. On pharmaceutical medications, Owen slept all day, lost nearly all of his developmental and cognitive skills that he once had. He lost them all. And he's still constantly seized. I want you all to take a moment and think about this for a second. This kid used to sit up. He used to roll over, and he used to hold his own cup. He used to walk in a walker. He used to say mama, dada, and even yeah and no at times. These sacred glimpses of our little boy's personality were stolen from us by pills. Haley's Hope gave us our little boy back. He's awake now, maybe not right now, but overall, he's awake. He communicates with us now. He smiles when we tell a joke that may or may not be funny. When his brothers talk to him, he loves them to pieces. And when he looks it up intently with those big, beautiful brown eyes, we feel his unconditional love again. I cannot begin to describe the joy and solace this safe, natural, non-psychoactive treatment has provided Owen and our family. With that said, some of you here at this point may be asking, well, if Owen is thriving on this medication, why are you here? And my quick answer is puberty, as you just saw a minute ago. His hormones have wreaked havoc on his seizures, and he recently started struggling with new and more severe seizures. Dravet is a monster that keeps us guessing. It adapts, it evolves, and becomes immune to treatments that initially work. We need the flexibility to explore different strains and ratios in order to find the combination that's the most effective to combat these seizures. So to sum up, we need a better system. We have a win-win opportunity here at our fingertips that could potentially help cancer-stricken aunts and uncles, relieve my Marine veteran brother-in-law of vicious wartime nightmares, or provide aid to an innocent sick child whose family doesn't have the financial resources to afford out-of-pocket unconventional treatments, all while vastly improving our struggling economic infrastructure. It's time. We need to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming here today. If you need any assistance or anything, if you'll let the officers outside, they will assist you.
All right, thank you.
Next up, Chip Paul, Kansas Cannabis Patients Advocate on Webex. Chip, are you on Webex?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Please go forward.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for having me today and members of the committee. For background, my name is Chip Paul, and I am the author of something called SQ 788, which is the Oklahoma medical marijuana law. In addition, I'm the executive director of one of the major trade organizations in Oklahoma, something called OK For You Approved. I also head a company, and I'm an endocannabinoid researcher. So we research the endocannabinoid system, which is the system that medical marijuana affects. And we do so in conjunction with the University of Mississippi and other major universities. I wanted to testify today, and I got asked to testify today to you guys really about medical conditions. And I would encourage you to not too tightly restrict your current bill as to medical conditions. If you look at Oklahoma, again, we are a wide open program. We did not restrict our program with medical conditions. However, what we did do is we have high physician accountability. So while it's unlikely that it would happen, in Oklahoma, you can sue your physician if you have a bad outcome. Physicians should have malpractice insurance if they're writing medical marijuana prescription recommendations in Oklahoma. They should have a medical record on every patient. So what we tried to do, instead of restricting the program with medical conditions, was we tried to basically restrict it by physicians. So really physicians are in control of, the flow of patients in and out of our program, as they should be and as they are with any other medical prescription, right? So the good news about our program here in Oklahoma, we have a lot of patients. We have never had a bad outcome, and we have not had one death associated with medical marijuana usage. I did get asked specifically to talk to you guys about autism today. Our company called New Pharma is leading, frankly, in autism research, and we do have an autism therapy that's an endocannabinoid strategy for autism. But I sent a couple of research papers along with my whoever's coordinating kind of who's speaking. So you guys have a couple of research papers there specifically on autism as it relates to the endocannabinoid system and deficiencies in the endocannabinoid
30 seconds left.
system. So those deficiencies can be addressed, obviously, by medical marijuana. And I would be happy to act as a resource. My email, is there. So any lawmakers that would like additional information, happy to act as a resource. If you want to know about the Oklahoma law, I'm actually driving to meet with our Oklahoma lawmakers today. So happy to bridge that if and when needed. Thank you guys very much, and I'm proud of you for addressing this issue.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Todd Scattini. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry. It's an Italian name, I believe.
That's okay. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Scattini. I'm really proud to address you today, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'm a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, and I, like all of my contemporaries, am very tired of burying veterans. We are literally hemorrhaging heroes, and this must stop. Studies have shown that suicide rates decline in states where medical cannabis is available, and they also show that opioid overdoses decrease by about 25%. Medical cannabis is a safe, effective option to treat the wounds of war, and I implore Kansas to move forward on the implementation of a medical cannabis program as quickly as possible. It is the right thing to do. It is what a compassionate leader would do. So I'm honored to address you as a veteran about cannabis and the opportunity that the re-legalization of this plant, what it presents, the opportunity it presents for Kansas, for the families of veterans, for the VA, and for the greater veteran community. As you know, veterans right now are in the midst of a healthcare crisis along with their families. We have elevated levels of suicide, mental health concerns, substance abuse issues. We have addiction, and many veterans also have difficulty finding meaningful employment that serves their passion after departing service. Cannabis can help with both of those issues. The opioid epidemic has taken far too many lives, and of course the veteran community has not escaped that as well. We've been critically impacted, and the U.S. military deploys to a combat theater, and about 60% of those come back and are prescribed an opioid medication. Repeated studies show that the states that have medical cannabis programs experience about a 25% reduction, as I said, in opioid overdoses. So we should really consider that, because we will all be judged by how we addressed the opioid crisis and the veteran suicide crisis. Before us really lies an opportunity for veterans and families in Kansas. It's likely the oldest and safest and most effective medicine that we've ever known. I see an opportunity for meaningful and rewarding employment with the development of an industry that much of the country and the rest of the world is engaged in. And we're in the midst of building this industry from the underground up. So as you begin to formulate your policies, I implore you to show compassion and address the issues that were created by cannabis prohibition through social equity considerations and expungement programs. Look to other states and see what has come before you to see what other states have done and learn from their mistakes. I also seek creative ways of expediting access, such as how Oregon has developed cross-border transportation with California and Washington so that you can expedite the access to the program. Encourage and empower your researchers in Kansas. I'm very proud to say we're already conducting hemp research at Kansas State University on the Olathe campus, and to include KU Med in this, as well as the VA.
Your time has expired.
Would be incredibly powerful. Thank you for your time.
I have one question of you.
Yes, sir.
Has the VA or any state done any survey to show that they have less incidents or less suicides in states that has medical marijuana versus states who do not?
Sir, the VA has not, and that's a real
They have not
shortcoming and
explored
lack
that
of
at all.
leadership.
And then would it not be true that they don't even look at that, whether or not a veteran has a medical marijuana card or not? Because, of course, they do not dispense it.
That's correct, sir.
They've done no survey.
That's
I think
correct,
that would be
sir.
interesting.
That's correct, sir, yeah. And a couple of the veteran service organizations have done surveys, both the American Legion and the VFW, and have shown wide acceptance of medical cannabis use and desire for research to take place. We're putting forth with AMVETS, another VSO, a proposal that Missouri be utilized as a research platform for the VA to allow them to observe how we implement our program.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir, thank you very much.
And Jordan, are you on? Jordan?
Mr. Chair, this is Jordan Milholm with Legislative Research.
Right. Could you just do some research into whether or not there has been any surveys at all concerning veterans who have or living in states that have medical marijuana and those states that do not, and whether or not they have reduced incidents? And I'm not sure there's one out there, but I think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We'd be happy to take a look for you to see if we could find any surveys on that topic.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Clayton Bullard with the Healthcare and Public Safety Clinic. Good morning, sir, and welcome to Federal State Affairs.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Clay Bullard, and I'm here on behalf of public safety and healthcare professionals across the state of Kansas, really for the idea that I wanted for you to consider adding an additional item to the bill that you guys have put forth so far. And that would be to add in and require that the Department of Health and Environment establish a quality assurance laboratory. Oklahoma did this. They were the first state to do this. And the reason they did it is because they focused in on the medical portion, which I think is what you guys are also considering, that this is a medical product. I've spent 25 years in healthcare industry and pharmaceuticals through the FDA, lab products through the FDA, medical devices through the FDA. Every one of those are scrutinized. And even after the initial application and approval of the product, each one of those industries have additional supervising bodies that are over them. So in the laboratories, it's CLIA, COLA, CAP, others. The medical marijuana industry has established their own accrediting agencies. I'm asking this because if physicians and nurses and people who need the product, how do they know how to dose the product if there's no standardization of testing? And I think it is important for the state of Kansas to establish a public-private partnership with somebody who's already doing that, so that there is not a variance like it is in most states. And in most states where cannabis has been legalized, the variance between laboratories, because there's no calibration of machines, there's no calibration of testing cycles, methodologies, standards, anything. So what happens is you can have a variance of plus or minus 45%. So think about that. It's an agricultural product, so it's really difficult, right? So you get a plus or minus of 45%. But where is this plumb line, the mean for the 45%? If nobody has a centralized regulatory body housed by the independent, non-industry driven that establishes a baseline, and then all the other laboratories that would come in and become licensed would then test the industry, which is required by your law, but the regulatory body would then try to calibrate and standardize those laboratories to a much narrower, so that when doctors dose the product for patients who do need it, and it does provide value, they know that they can dose it at a product that is acceptable. It is also safe. And so for public safety and for medical professionals who will be putting their licenses on the line to actually be prescribing this, I encourage you to consider a quality assurance laboratory.
Before you go, I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
I came by information that I believe they have a number of labs in Oklahoma.
20 in Oklahoma, correct.
And there was probably 21, but one lab lost its license. Are you familiar at all with this incident?
Very much so. So there's actually two laboratories, one under investigation, one that was lost their license. Actually, they surrendered their license. So when Oklahoma put forth and contracted the quality assurance laboratory, within 90 days of that, the largest lab in the state of Oklahoma voluntarily surrendered their license. The reason they did that is because they were in relationships with the growers to make sure that all their product tests and all their product that was tested passed. Well, what was happening was he ran the first products for the customer, but then he stopped testing. He started assuming that all of the product that they grew and processed met the same standard. We call that dry labbing. He was never actually testing the product. He was just creating a certificate of analysis and handing it, which allowed the grower to be able to sell the product wherever he wanted. He knew whenever the quality assurance laboratory was established that his gig was up. He couldn't just take money for paper versus actually doing the testing. So they were able to go in and just do testing on it immediately. Before they even did the first test, he voluntarily surrendered his license and said, I'm no longer going to participate in the cannabis industry in the state of Oklahoma.
I have one more.
Okay.
Now, initially, Oklahoma did not have that quality control.
Correct. So for the first year, they did not have that lab established. Even though they were required to, the Department of Health was slow in implementing that process, and they did it after the fact. Therefore, they grandfathered in all of the laboratories without accreditation, without any type of oversight, and it has taken, it's an arduous task to try to get everybody back in line after everybody's out doing what they want to do. And I understand from a laboratory standpoint, I would be upset when the rules change after I've already been in there. So I would encourage you to do that before any licenses are put out there.
And we may be able to go to Oklahoma and take that language out of their bill. Or if you could supply language to the committee.
Happy to supply it, yeah. It really just allows the Department of Health to do what they already know how to do. and that's to put forth rules, regulations, and enforce them. And those medical standards already exist for labs, medical devices, and other. You could simply adopt those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You may have questions later.
Okay.
Next is Chris Eisenhoff, Kansas Cannabis Business Association by Webex. Chris, are you? You're here in person. Okay. Well, welcome to Federal and State Affairs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Chris Eisenhoff. I'm the Director of Policy for the Kansas Cannabis Business Association. I'd like to be as brief as possible to reserve as much time for other conferees, but I am 14 years into a diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis, 11 years into a career in the cannabis industry. I'm 3 years into ownership of a medical cannabis dispensary in the state of Maryland. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like to highlight Robert Kowalski's testimony. He is a disabled veteran and patient representative for the Ohio Medical Marijuana Advisory Board. So with that, I do reserve my time, and I'll stand for any questions that you might have at the end. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Next is Laura Adkins on Webex. Laura, are you on Webex?
Hi, yes, I am.
Please go forward with your testimony.
Well, good morning. My name is Laura Adkins, and I live in rural Edward County. I'm certified in support of HB 2184 with changes. I will individually email you changes I personally like to see. I support medical marijuana because I see veterans suffering on a daily basis. They need safe access to medical marijuana because they have already put their lives on the line and should not have to do so to get relief from their life-altering symptoms from their service. Numerous veterans have failed all medications. Their PTSD and TBIs go untreated every day. The doctors at the VA often tell them their current patient, or tell them about their current patients, about former patients they have treated in other states where medical marijuana is legal, and how they have effectively received relief from their symptoms. This leaves veterans wanting to create their own relief. They put themselves in dangerous situations to get some relief. Some of these veterans have told me gruesome stories of being beaten, robbed, and held at gunpoint just trying to get medication the doctors from the VA told them would help. This puts them and the public in great danger. They come to me to tell their stories knowing I will tell you in hopes you will listen and not just hear. I urge you to support HB 21 with changes so that the veterans in this state can have access and safe legal access to medication that will give them the quality of life that they fought for you to have and they deserve as well. And just real quickly, one of the changes that I seen when I read the bill was, according to the bill, patients would have to have a 12-month bona fide physician-patient relationship in order to get the recommendation to get a license for receiving medical marijuana treatment. But veterans that receive treatment at the VA cannot get a license because their doctors at the VA will not be legally allowed to get that license because it's federally legal on the level. So we need to put in a provision in there that would allow veterans to not have a bona fide 12-month patient-physician relationship and just get some sort of written documentation from the VA to take to a doctor who is allowed to appeal to the Board of Healing Arts. And
We're
that's
at 30
pretty much
seconds.
Thank you, ma'am. We're going to move right along. We've got another 10 minutes, and then I've got to get all my conferees in. If not, they'll come back tomorrow. George Hanna, Kansas Normal. George, I'd ask you to keep it as brief as possible. I've still got about 3 more people.
Thank you, Chair. My name is George Hanna, and I'm the co-director for Kansas Normal, which is the National Organization of Reform Marijuana Laws. I submitted quite a bit of testimony, but so I encourage you to take a look at it in the writing. However, we actually represent tens of millions of people across the country that have used or currently use marijuana. We've been around since 1970. But I wanted to highlight a couple of issues and then pose a question instead of just having the same old thing where you are being told what you want to or should be hearing. I want you to actually ask yourself these questions when you look at this bill. Perception, particularly amongst juveniles, is certainly a concern of this committee. We all have seek public office for wanting to do the better good for our particular communities, and I appreciate that. I genuinely feel that every one of you has that in your mind and want to do as much as you can. However, the perception amongst juveniles, I referenced a specific study that involved 220,000 juveniles in states where that is legal. I put the methodology of the study in this, so it is a very large study. Bottom line is those juveniles under 14 years of age find it considerably more difficult to access cannabis in states where it is regulated and legal. 47% of 220,000 juveniles reduction. I think that's very compelling that perception is a very powerful tool. One of the other issues that I referenced in here is this PTSD. That issue is near and dear to my heart. I have actually escorted suicide victims of veterans. I've been a veteran advocate for the last 10 years. I have gone in motorcycle processions all the way to Arlington National Cemetery to bury fellow veterans. The PTSD study that I referenced in here is from Nevada. And again, it shows substantial reduction in symptoms related to PTSD. And to go to the question as to the VA, my doctor from the VA has specifically said that he would, if he were able to prescribe cannabis. However, unfortunately, just like we have so many out-of-state testimonies today, considering how it is in Kansas, everybody is really putting themselves at a personal risk if they go out on the limb too far for cannabis. Last thing is I want to point out, which has already been addressed, the 12-month relationship with the doctors, and that is that under Kansas law, we're required to establish residency within 90 days of moving to the state of Kansas. We consistently rank in the bottom half of the country for a net population gain.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next up would be Mark Barlow. Barlow. Again, I hate to cut people off, but we're going to be leaving here in less than 10 minutes. And I'm trying to get all the conferees up. Please go forward.
To the committee members and the chair, my name is Mark Barlow. In 2006, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I've actively engaged in therapy since that time, ranging from one-on-one to group to art therapy to EMDR treatment. I've been on antidepressants, anti-anxieties, and anti-nightmare pharmaceuticals. I have pursued yoga, guided Buddhist meditation, and professional lifestyles tailored around serving my community to the best of my abilities. I am haunted by regular intervals of night terrors and sleep paralysis. I have suffered additional trauma from accidents incurred by these incidents of terrified and confused waking. My sole reprieve has been the intermittent use of cannabis. Through this tool, and after 11 years of silent and private suffering, I have finally been allowed to sleep undisturbed. Since incorporating cannabis into my life, I have discovered a home in community theater where I am allowed to safely express the emotions and sensations bounded by the turmoil of my past. 2020 was a landmark year of trauma in our society. I believe that opening the availability of cannabis to Kansans afflicted by traumas and stressors can and will release much of the psycho-social tensions continuing to escalate throughout our society.
30 seconds.
It is incumbent upon us all to provide this tool of healing to those most in need of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Lee Carr by Webex. Lee, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Please go forward. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, committee members. I'm just going to get straight to the punch. I am a registered nurse and a mom of a special needs child. Late last year, my son was diagnosed with autism. His autism diagnosis went undiagnosed as sensory processing disorder for 3 years. In the past 3 years, we chose to medicate our son with CBD instead of pharmaceuticals. We chose this route as we did not want to give our, at the time, 4-year-old son Adderall. I myself was on Adderall and it did me no favors. It was actually my entrance drug to many, many other pharmaceuticals. I myself was on a merry-go-round of them for many years until I found CBD and was able to get off 5 daily pharmaceuticals. So when the time came for me to medicate my son, I knew not to start him on the road I was on. In Kansas, we are only allowed CBD isolate, and this is far from what my child truly needs to be his best self. Numerous studies have shown full plant medicine is the best for children with autism, providing the most relief for their symptoms. Please see my references in my written testimony at the end of my testimony. I would like to point out you are lives with autism and many other children in the state of Kansas who have not had the opportunity to be free to heal with medical cannabis. In Kansas, families and their children have not had the opportunity to heal with cannabis. Many families have had to leave the state to our neighboring states that have been able to get their lives back due to access to medical cannabis. I personally get to witness children heal across the state lines in Missouri that I work with. It is unfair to the mothers and fathers to get to watch their children walk, talk, sleep through the night, and become nonviolent just 10 miles away from my home. Well, we have constantly spent every ounce of energy we have to make sure our son is safe. We have not slept through the night in 6 years. 6 years of disrupted sleep for our child and us that could have been helped with just as little as 5 milligrams of THC. The lives of parents with children of autism can also be greatly improved with access to cannabis for their children. It is not just the children that benefit, but the whole family that gets to benefit. Parents, siblings, even grandparents who may get to hear their grandchild's talk for the first time and say, I love you. Cannabis has the ability to do just that. Cannabis can help calm children. I ask you.
Go ahead. That's all right. Last up is Aaron Montroy, Kansas Cannabis Business. Is Aaron here? He is not here. She has not indicated she's on Webex. She is not on Webex. Thank you. No, we're at 10:22. We are closing down. Yes. And who are you? Did you submit written testimony? No. Tomorrow you may come back. I have, my goal is to be out here at 10:25. It is 10:23. Committee members and conferees, you have all their written testimony. I would suggest you go through that. They also have contact information. If you have specific questions of them, please email them. Tomorrow we have the opponents. We have as many opponents and neutrals as we had today. So tomorrow we're going to be another full day. With that, anything for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.